now with a very eminent panel and very little time to talk about really the elephant in the room, which is what are we going to do about the most pressing crisis that humanity is going to face, not just now, and that the elephant in the room is now showing its contours. So I don't know who thought of the title for this session, which says, how do you get real about sustainability? And that is the crux of the problem, because climate change is something we read about in the papers or see on TV. We do not act in, we are not focused and we are not fearful. When COVID came, we got those two things together because it was in our drawing rooms. But climate change is something which happens to other people, in other places, in other times. And unless we feel the threat to our lives and our families, this show will go on. You all know what's going to happen to our children now, the way it's going. Once temperature rises about 2 degrees centigrade, large parts of the planet are going to be uninhabitable. Even now we are seeing those changes that come from the deep south of India, where the climate aberrations are scary. The Western Ghats are sliding down. In the south of England, 40 degrees centigrade this summer. That's where we are. We need to really focus and fear around this whole threat, the numero uno threat to the whole of humanity. So I don't want to take much time. We have very eminent people on the panel here. Sunita Narayan, the doyen of environmental sustainability in this country, back in the days when nobody knew much about it. And every passing month, her voice becomes even more prophetic. What she has done for this country, just immeasurable. Great privilege to have you here, ma'am. Ms. Gul Panag, a voice of moderation and decency. Also, in another avatar, runs a solar fuel company, which she'll speak about, I'm sure, in her spiel today. Zahira Segra, who's the head of sustainability for Petronas, one of the largest fuel companies in the world, but also overseeing a complete energy transition by 2050 or something for the whole company. She'll speak about her vision there. And Mr. Jena, who is one of the country's leading experts on disaster relief and rehabilitation, and he comes from the state of Orissa, which has always been a theater of climate impact events with huge stories which he has to share. Don't want to take much time, just basically touching upon two themes. What does this country do? We have a whole carbon reduction targets for 2070. Are we going to get there? Can we do a just transition given the kind of dependence on coal, which is now worldwide becoming more important as a consequence of geopolitical changes? Or how are we going to make that journey is one theme. And second theme is how do we prepare the nation for the climate impact events, which I'm sure Mr. Jena will speak about. So Ms. Narayanan, why don't you sort of set the ball rolling here?
So thank you, Elias, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a tough time in the world. We are at a cusp, that is very clear. And I think for all the people in this room, we don't need now to say climate change is going to happen. It's happening. And we see it. We see it in our world. We see it all around us in terms of extreme weather events. We also see the impact on the poorest in our countries. And we also know that this is happening when global temperatures have only gone up by 1.1 degree centigrade. And we are definitely on course for 1.5, if not 2, at the current rate of emissions. By 2030, the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees centigrade rise will be over. That's how grim the situation is. We also, so therefore, I think, Elias, in this forum today, I think the only question that is there is, how do we move ahead? And that's really the question that you have posed us as well. What is the just transition for a country like India, where it is clear we need development, but it is also very clear that development without environmental sustainability is not going to work for ourselves. Forget the rest of the world. Now, this is where, to me, there are huge opportunities we have, which is where we as a country need to focus on. But the bottom line, I will get into the various opportunities in brief, but I want to make one very hard message to this very eminent group of people. It is not going to be business as usual. It is not going to be slow incremental change. It is going to be hard, tough decisions that we will have to take as a country. And I think that is the first thing that we have to understand. The scale of climate change, the existential threat of climate change means that we have to run the talk, not just walk the talk. So in every idea that we can put forward, the first thing we have to ask is, how can this be scaled up? How can it be done in a way that it is affordable for large numbers of people in my country? Because for India, affordability equals sustainability. If you have an answer which, I love the idea of electric vehicles, but electric vehicles which work for a minuscule number of people are not going to solve India's problems. If you're serious about local air pollution and you're serious about climate change, then the answer is going to be mobility transformation. And mobility transformation, and that's the just transition that we should be talking about, that mobility transformation has to start with the vehicle of the poorest, the cycle, the two-wheeler, the three-wheeler, the bus. We have to get to a point where people can buy a car, but they don't need to drive it. That's the mobility transformation. And that then has to be driven on clean fuel. Now, we also know that coal is one of our biggest bugbears, and I'm sure we will discuss that more in our panel. But it is also clear that India needs affordable power. Now, to me, the answer for coal is that first, and I hope there is nobody here from the thermal power sector, but I will make it very clear to you, you are absolute laggards when it comes to implementing the 2017 emission norms, which were done to essentially make sure that at least coal-based power plants were cleaner and would meet the local air pollution norms. Now, we clearly need to move out of coal, either into gas, which is an interim solution, and then, of course, into renewables. But we will need to find a way in which we can balance the needs of both development and as well as environment. It's possible. It's definitely possible to do a just transition. But the bottom line is that you will have to take some very hard decisions. They will have to be transformational, and you have to keep the poorest person in India in mind.
Thanks for that. And the good thing, Mr. Narayan, is that the economics of energy transition have tilted in favor of renewable energy. The best thing which has happened in our generation. Ms. Panang, in your lesser-known avatar, you're also a great champion for sustainable energy. You have this own company of yours. So can you tell us a bit about what are your thoughts around how we need to do this in a sustainable way?
I think the sustainability piece needs to be broken down into 3 packets: the short term, the medium term, and the long term. That's the first bit. The second bit is, unless we attack it with a short term, medium term, and long term focus, we could potentially be completely incapacitated by another black swan event. We've seen one which people only see once in their lifetimes, with what the COVID pandemic did to us economically. But we're not too far from our neighboring country that is being devastated by floods. We are just a fraction of area away from them in the map. What is happening in Pakistan today could very well happen to us. So we have to keep a horizon in a manner that allows us to evaluate our short-term, our medium-term, and our long-term goals. And as Sunita very candidly and very correctly put, in my opinion, sustainability in India is deeply tied to affordability, and that is an opportunity for innovation. Interestingly, today, the fastest adoption of EVs has actually happened at the lowest scale with two-wheelers, entry-level two-wheelers that are being used for food delivery. And they're not using those two-wheelers because they are sustainable. They're using them because they are cheaper. And no one thought a couple of years ago that India was going to lead the charge in EV adoption from the entry-level segment. India has a unique ability to scale up, and they can be certain force multipliers as a result of technology. When people talk of us not being ready for EVs because of lack of charging infrastructure, or because of the fact that today EVs are being charged by dirty power. And as Sunita once again pointed out, there is a short-term and a medium-term solution to the way thermal power is generated, and of course a long-term one which is doing away with it altogether. But as per our Honorable Prime Minister's mission, India is going to be the largest producer of clean power in the world. We will be adding 100 gigawatts of clean power very, very soon. It was supposed to have been 2023. I think we may miss that by a year. But the fact remains that we will be the largest producers of renewable energy. So that takes care of the medium term. I think the air we breathe impacts us immediately. And sustainability, affordability, short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions is really how you can keep sustainability real, and breaking it down for people to be able to understand. If you jargonize it, if you make it difficult, it's going to go over people's heads. And they need to be vested. And again, to quote Sunita, unless and until they have skin in the game through affordability, it's not going to happen. So citing lack of charging infrastructure, and that's my closing bit for this thought, citing lack of charging infrastructure as a reason for EVs to not grow is like saying, I'll buy a mobile when I find adequate charging points outside. You don't do that. You buy a mobile because you need it. And then, sometimes you end up finding charging points in airports and other places in the beginning. Similarly, as somebody who's been driving an electric vehicle as my primary vehicle of commute for 7 years now, I've rarely ever felt the need to charge outside. And as founder, co-founder of Sunfuel, a charge point operator, what we say, city charging, not to be confused with highway charging, which is DC chargers, city charging is essentially needed but not required. It's needed to assuage your anxiety, that in case I run short of charge, there's a charger, but you always charge at home. So I think to conclude, we need to attack the short-term piece immediately and tie it in with innovation to be able to find medium-term and long-term solutions to make sustainability real and achievable.
Thanks for that, Ms. Fanak. So, Sahira, moving on to you. You represent Petronas, one of the tigers of the petroleum world, and also quite comfort to know that you're doing a massive transition strategy. Exxon, Petronas, etc. This is a drug of choice for humanity now. You can't get off that addiction. So what are your thoughts? I know you're a forward-looking thinker. What are your thoughts for this whole journey you embarked on, in which you lead in Petronas, not only for Petronas as a whole, but for India also, to which you're very emotionally attached, I know. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. No, I mean, yes, I'm very conscious that I come from the dirty industry, right? The oil and gas. No, but I think, maybe if we take a step back, why are we in this situation right now? I think we need to ask ourselves, right? It started with the Industrial Revolution of the 50s, where, we had this incessant need to consume, this thing about consuming. It's consuming us in a way, and that is why, companies like the energy industry, they exist because of demand. As long as people are, wanting it, you will always have that demand. So I think, to me, as much as today you see, sustainability, having these commitments of net carbon zero, it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. You can't operate, business cannot operate today if you don't have it. But I think beyond that, if I look at it from a more individual level, I think all of us collectively can do a lot together. We have, of course, as captains of industry and having, in our spheres of influence, we can do a lot of things that will help achieve that sustainability that we want to do. But I think as consumers, and all of us are consumers, how do we individually also do a little bit better? I'll be very realistic. Hand in heart, I don't think tomorrow I can move into a farm and stop the kind of lifestyle I have or the kind of things I have. But I know that consciously I do things less, right? I don't need to consume so much today. And then tomorrow I hope that I'll consume less than I did today. So I think that is at an individual level we need to do it. But of course at company levels, at societies, at nations, there is a lot of emphasis, and I think collective movement needs to happen. And I was just, when I was talking to you guys earlier, I was saying that talking about renewables, talking about sustainability, this was something at a corporate level we talked about 10, 15 years ago. We did a lot of studies. How do we transition? But the numbers never added up. We could never crack the code. We talked about even things like solar that used to be so expensive, and today it's become so much more affordable. So I think as we have evolved, as technology has evolved, you can see that it's becoming a lot more affordable, and then you see that shift. And of course, a lot of communication and awareness has happened. Now, if I come to India specifically, 1/6 of humanity sits here, right? 1/6 of humanity. And when you think about that and the complexities, it's amazing the kind of commitments that India has done. And that's why I follow India very closely. Of course, I told you my roots are here. But why I have a lot of affinity to this country is really because I honestly see India as going to be taking the leadership role in sustainability, in showing the world how it's done. Because, I mean, this morning we talked about the ancient civilizations have gotten it right. I think in that sense, there is a lot where India has learned how to live in harmony, one with nature, one with the universe. I mean, if I look at that level of energy that exists, there is so much here that we can do to really take sustainability to the next level. And I think that's where I see that this will be the space to make it happen here. Yeah.
Good to hear that, Sahira. My colleague Pradeep, you have one of the most difficult jobs in this country. Disaster resilience in Orissa, where the monsoon acts out its Tandava every year on year. And it's a great thing that your state has done in terms of reducing the number of deaths arising from these violent monsoons. Really, all of us would like to hear some ground level thoughts. And what are the learnings for all of us, the corporate world, the rest of India, from your field level experience? And you're one of the leaders here, we know.
Thank you. In fact, I'll start with one episode that happened in 1999, October 29th. If anybody remembers, the India's worst cyclone hit Odisha in 99, October 29th. And we lost about 10,000 plus people. And few months after, the present Chief Minister got elected as the Chief Minister, and he is continuing since then. And in last 20 years, we have seen 10 cyclones. And in last 3 years, I have personally managed 7 cyclones as the Chief Disaster Management Officer of the state. So from 10,000 deaths, we have now got our deaths reduced to 0 in last 7 cyclones. So while this may be a very creditable performance, in terms of reducing loss of human lives, but then I don't think it's a very major achievement. So our objective is, yes, certainly to reduce loss of human lives, but also to ensure that the loss of livelihoods is not there, the loss of assets that we lose every year. I'll give you one example. In 2013, there was a cyclone and I was the power secretary in the state. I lost, it was a 220-kilometer wind speed cyclone, and I lost 6 lakh electricity poles and 34,000 kilometers of power lines. So what happens? We immediately restore them, but then we don't build them better. As a result, what happens? Next time, whenever there is another cyclone, again, half of the assets will again be lost. The same thing happened in 2019, the most severe summer cyclone of the country hit Odisha. That was 2019 May. And we lost about 300,000 electricity poles. So this recurrence of damages and loss is becoming too much for a state to manage. So what is more important, while we have done quite a lot in our response actions, in forecast technologies, in early warning dissemination, and then search and rescue, relief, immediate reconstruction, then possibly we as a country possibly have not done too well when it comes to bringing in disaster resilience. So that is a big challenge that we as a country should face. And what we saw in Bangalore few days back, and one day's waterlogging immediately wiped out 226 crore value of water. And what we saw in Pakistan few weeks before, we might see it in our country anytime. So are we prepared to reduce such disasters, to minimize occurrence of disaster? That's a long-term thing. I don't know how we as a country work on reducing the climate change impacts. That's a global action is required. But along with global action at national level and subnational level also, we need to work there. But what I would talk about, how do we bring in resilience into our infrastructure, into our livelihoods, and what is happening right now in the country. Unfortunately, after the response phase is over, again it becomes a business as usual. The simple reason is that during response phase, there is too much of media glare, too much of scrutiny, therefore everybody tries to do a good job, and once that response phase is over, the TRP rating would not there, media moves away, and the issues are forgotten. So that is where I, as the Chief Disaster Manager of the state of Odisha, I have a challenge. How do I motivate my government, my colleague officers to mainstream disaster risk reduction in the governance framework? I'll give you two examples. Just rural housing. In fact, earlier in 99 super cyclone, the state lost about 1 million houses. So then these rural houses, only $1,500 cost house, a concrete small house. Because we have now built large number of such Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and previous Indira Awas houses, today I don't have to evacuate large number of people. And those houses are able to withstand wind speed up to 250, 300 km per hour. So, but the issue is these houses, when it comes to flooding, they don't help me. I have to evacuate lakhs and lakhs of people. So when we are going for housing for all, can't we think of making a disaster resilient housing for all? So that means we need to work on policy framework, change the norms, designs, costs, and if we don't look into the mitigation aspects and we don't look into the adaptation actions, so year after year we will lose our assets, we will lose our income, and economic growth will hamper. So the challenge before me is basically how do we as a society, we as governments, we as privates, and we as civil society, how do we keep the pressure on the government to start thinking differently, redesign the program, schemes, components, and gradually mainstream disaster risk reduction into the governance program of the country. That is.
Thanks, Pradeep. Coming back to Ms. Narayan, if I can ask you a very difficult question. India has upped its RE target to about 500 gigawatts in the last COP26, most ambitious of any country in the world, if I remember right. And governments can only be a mediator, take the middle road, because you look at the momentum of existing industries, the power producers, the coal manufacturers, so many forces act on any government in this world of ours. So how do you think can government navigate that middle path and bring the same focus which they brought into the COVID strategy to make us all aligned on the same road? That is my question. There are no easy answers, but I thought you are the best person to answer that.
So, Elias, very good question. Obviously, very complicated. But let me give you a framing for this, because, so for me, the only way that we will be able to navigate the future is as we come together to understand a co-benefit approach. We need to look at how we can find answers which are good for us and which will work for the environment. Let me take Pradeep ji's issue one step forward. The fact is our cities today are extremely vulnerable to flooding. The most ironic of images that we have seen in this last 10 days was people's, with huge luxury cars being evacuated from their homes in lowly tractors. That is the equalizer of climate change. But the fact is, why is Bangalore in this mess? Why are our cities in a mess? Because we have forgotten the drainage systems of our cities. We have forgotten the value of holding the raindrop, recharging it in the ponds and tanks that existed across the country, from Kerala to Odisha to every part of India. Now, in today's climate risk world, we have a greater risk of excess water and also long-term drought. If we want to find an answer, the only answer that we will have, which will work for all, which will be to go back to look at our traditions of harvesting water where and where it falls, recharging the groundwater, reprotecting our lakes, ponds, drainage. I mean, your state of Kerala has to do a drainage master plan so that every drop of water can be protected in the lakes, the dug wells that you have. That works for us. Same thing with industry. I mean, look at the hard to decarbonize sectors. Look at steel industry. Look at cement industry. Clearly, we need cement as we go ahead. We will need steel. But what is the decarbonization route for both those industries is going to be, how can you deepen the circular economy in those two industries? You have steel, you have scrap. How do you increase the percentage of scrap that is used in steel? How do you lower the resource intensity of every ton of steel that is produced? How do you make sure that the fly ash or the slag that is produced by thermal power plants, today we are only using still, not enough. We have a cap of 30% on cement for the use of recycled material. Can we not increase that? So, to me, when I sit here, I'm not coming here to say there's a total disaster. There are huge opportunities. But again, the bottom line is, it's not going to be incremental. It's not going to be business as usual. Tough decisions will need to be taken. And this is where, Pradeep, in some senses, government is going to have to set out a much tougher roadmap. The 500 gigawatts roadmap of our Prime Minister, very good, but now we have already whittled it down to installed capacity rather than total generation. Still ambitious, still good, but we need to do much more. And I think that's what we need to speak about.
Thanks for that. Ms. Panag, if I can take the conversation to another dimension. People like you are influencers of this country. Thousands of people hang on to every word of people like you. How do you turn the conversation, and you meaning all your peers, compatriots, people who work in the entertainment industry and elsewhere, how do influencers like you, what can you do to turn the conversation in our drawing rooms towards this large and imminent danger which every one of us is going to face, our children are going to face? Why is there not more urgency, and why is there no more discussion in drawing rooms about it, and what can we do?
I think the first thing people with a public profile who can influence minds of others should do is actually walk the talk. If they do it themselves, it becomes easier for them to talk about it. We know famous people love talking about themselves. So if they do this, if they pursue sustainability at whatever level, I mean, there are lots of opportunities out there. There are ways in which we can make this a talking point, but you can only make it a talking point if you are vested yourself, and you're only vested yourself when you are walking the talk. And when you do walk the talk, typically that's all you'll talk. That is the quickest way to get people with influence talking about sustainability and the action each one of us can take in our drawing rooms, in our cafeterias, in wherever we go. And mind you, today everybody is an influencer. Everybody in this room is an influencer. Everybody consuming images and information and videos coming out of this summit is an influencer in their sphere of influence. The sphere of influence may vary, but let there be no mistake, everybody in this room is an influencer. And if all of us can walk the talk and then talk about it, I'm sure we'll influence a lot of people, and God knows we need to.
Thanks, Ms. Panag. We are running out of time. Any famous last words, Zahira, Pradeep?
I have to agree with, Sunita, I think that, we talk about circular economy today, but, honestly, these are not new concepts. They have been done for generations before. So I think we have to start embracing that, how we used to do things before actually worked. It helped. There was that harmony that we had. And actually believe that, less is more. And I think that we need to talk a lot about. And again, like we said, in our sphere of influences, as individuals, as societies, as companies, as nations, I think we can do a lot more together. Yeah. So
Thanks, Sahira. Pradeep, anything you want to say?
I'll just only add one dimension. In this game of sustainability, in this game of bringing resilience into mainstream, there is a need to evolve partnership and long sustained partnership between government, non-government and civil society and private corporates to work together. Then only possibly the issue that we are talking, we can achieve something. And what Sunita ji told, that in the context of urban flooding, unless we sometimes have to be a little ruthless in enforcing discipline, and sometimes, most often, we allow people to flout. And I always tell one thing, that all of us are expanding the roads that we use. Highways are being expanded, widened, village roads are being widened. But who is widening the course of the water channels? Who is protecting those water channels? Nobody. Rather, we encroach. And there is no disincentive for people who are encroaching or who are violating. Unless we reverse this trend, we may talk of these things, but the situation in the ground would not change.
Thanks, Pradeep. I'll leave the very last word to Ms. Narayan, something we can take home with us.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's a moment in history. It's a very important moment in history. And I think for all of us, we need to make sure that we can, as Gul said so clearly, we can walk the talk. In fact, I think we need to run the talk in every area that we work. And I'm sure we will. I have huge faith in the ability of humankind to find, to innovate, and to build a better, more humane future. But I think for us, that humanity is what will be the beginning and end of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Can we have a round of applause for our esteemed group of panelists and the moderator? Would request Mr. Sandeep Das, CEO, Private Clients, Barclays Bank, to kindly grace the stage and present the mementos. फिर से जोरदार तालियां. Let's have it for our panelists. A big thank you to